Hello and welcome to another lap guide for the iRacing Camel GT series. This week we're at Sebring. Here's the lap first. All right, so lap time there is a 1:45.471. Let's go ahead and jump back to the start of the lap and go into this in more detail. So we have late afternoon weather for this week, and I have done a prior lap guide for Sebring in afternoon weather, and so I felt that since I was going to be updating the setup and testing with the cooler weather, that it'd be a good idea to run another lap guide. And I know lap times are going to be at least a second and a half quicker. We're probably going to see on average between 80 to 90 Fahrenheit track temp, but in some cases where we have overcast weather, much cooler than that. So in this particular weather, I was looking at a optimal of about a 145 flat. And I think that we had a session that we were practicing in that was 70 Fahrenheit track temp with overcast, and I think it was a 143.9, just crazy amounts of grip with the cool overcast weather. So there's some potential for some really quick lap times. So what I've actually done is actually estimated that it would be possible for us to run 18 laps instead of 17 laps, which is I believe what we ran in prior seasons in the afternoon weather. Now that obviously assumes there's not a lot of traffic and maybe a light field of Audi traffic where the lap times can stay in those really quick times. So I added some extra fuel to the setup to account for that possibility. So let's go ahead and go through this turn by turn now and talk about this in more detail. So coming up into turn one, just setting up pretty close to the wall here. The turn-in point is just past the bend in the wall here. So just as I've passed that, there's going to be a quick brake, about 40% brake, and then a downshift into fourth. And what you're aiming to do here in turn one is to apex right at about where you see the cone at the top of the fence here. And getting on throttle right at about that point. You'll also notice if you're looking at the line that there's a kind of a elbow there in the line. That's also a good reference point for the apex and about the point where you want to be starting to ease back into throttle. Now I'm getting back to throttle a little early here. I think I felt like I overslowed the car. Sometimes I'm actually tapping the brakes at this point. Just depends on how much speed I carry into the corner. So you'll want to gauge that based on how much grip and how well the car is turning into the apex of the corner. And if you feel like you're going to overshoot it, then maybe just kind of tap the brakes to kind of trail brake into it just a bit, aiming to get the car as close to this point so that you can get back to throttle. So I was actually getting back to throttle a little early overslowed the car in this instance, but this again is the point where I'm aiming to reach the apex to make sure that I can now throttle out and not overshoot the exit. So you can go ahead and ease back to full throttle. And how soon you get back to full throttle, of course, will be based on whether or not you feel you can get to the curbing without going too far off over into the dirt. Now you can cross into it just a bit, and I typically do toward the end of the curbing here, where you'll see the car will cross over into the dirt there. There's no off track for that, but that's the typical line that I run there, exiting the curbing back to the straight there. So let's play this through at speed. All right, so come up around turn 2 into turn 3. So the braking point for turn 3 is, I like to threshold before I reach the double cone here. So as you'll see, about an 80% brake right at about that point. So if you kind of figure right in between the 2 and the 3 cone, maybe starting to brake as you reach the 3 cone and then threshold brake in between. If you threshold brake closer to the 2 cone, it can be difficult to turn in here and carry. You might carry too much speed into the corner, and that can put you at risk of a slide. Although you can move your braking point up just a bit if it's cooler weather than this. So obviously gauge that based on how much grip you have and based on the weather conditions. If you're now, this is obviously qualifying fuel. If you're in race fuel, you may want to move the braking point back just a little bit. And also bear in mind that if you're following a car ahead, you're going to have some extra speed from draft. And again, you may want to further move that brake point up just a bit. And of course, get a feel for how much speed you're comfortable carrying into the corner. Keep the car to the right. Be patient on turn in. You'll see that I don't start to turn in until I've kind of just passed the 1 cone and start to turn in there. It is a late apex, so you don't want to get to the curb too soon. The apex that I'm aiming for is right here, just past the elbow there in the curbing. So I want to make sure I get pretty close to that, and that's the point where I'm also starting to ease back into throttle. Very gradual on throttle all the way through turn 3 and then around turn 4. Let's go ahead and play those through now. So as you come around turn 4 to set up for turn 5, you just want to get over here to close to the right, close to the curbing, and get prepared to turn in again a late apex. There is a bit of light braking, about 20% braking as I reach the turn-in point. That helps shift the weight of the car forward onto the front and to get a little bit better decisive turn-in. Now, as you turn in, again, don't apex too soon. The apex you're looking for is, again, after the angle and the curbing. And so I like to get as close to that as I can. You can't touch it real lightly, but I try to avoid touching it at all just because of the risk of unsettling the car too much. So just to get close to it as possible. And the closer you can get to it, the sooner you'll be able to get to throttle and then ease into throttle. How soon you can ease in and reach full throttle will be based on how much speed you're carrying toward the exit curbing here. And on the exit curbing, now you can take more curbing than this, and the car will bounce around a bit, get unsettled a bit. I like to take it really about the point that's in this example here, where I just maybe lightly graze the curbing there, and I'm away from the curbing by the time you reach the dirt there. There's a pretty rough bump there. I don't know if damage can occur there, and I haven't looked at that in the past, but it's pretty rough. And as you are running this line later in the race with a little more tire wear, I think you have a little bit more risk of traction loss. There's also a point right in between as you're easing back to throttle, right at about the 50% throttle mark, and as you're unwinding your steering here, you can sometimes get a little bit of throttle oversteer if you're a little too eager. So that's another point to be cautious of. So let's play that through. Okay, so coming around Big Bend, this is your first good passing zone, at least from the beginning of the lap. So getting a good exit to that prior corner is important to close the gap on your opponent, use the draft, and to get around your opponent. So this is the first passing zone. There are actually 5 decent passing zones on this track, so it makes it a lot of fun to race here. It's obviously a very flat track, and being a former airfield, there isn't a lot of camber to the road, and so you have to be a little bit more careful on some of the corners because of that. But because there are some good passing zones, I think it makes it a great track for racing, and a lot of fun side-by-side action can occur through these passing zones here. This is obviously full throttle all the way down the straight. The braking point is the threshold before reach the triple or 3 cone here. So again, that'll be about a 80% or so braking. Starting to brake probably just past the 4 and then threshold before 3 cone, and starting to ease off braking pretty quickly as the grip will begin to fall away as the speed of the car slows and you have less and less downforce. So the technique of braking, as always in this car, is to brake very hard at first when you have a lot of downforce pushing down onto the tires, and you can get away with heavier braking to be more efficient, to slow the car more quickly initially, and then ease off pretty quickly to avoid lockup. So you want to kind of find where that threshold is as you ease off, and as obviously the slower you get, the threshold of braking will slightly, continually reduce to avoid locking up there. Be patient on turning here. You don't want to turn in and hit this curbing too soon. I'm going to turn in probably right at about the point of the lighter colored concrete here, and you want to apex right at about the midpoint here of the curbing here, right where you see the most dirt really. And the goal here as you apex through this corner is to make sure you haven't overslowed the car. You don't want to be getting back to throttle too early because you overslowed the car, because this is a bad spot to be getting back on throttle. But it'll also be well off the brakes to where you're very, very light on brakes. And as your car's coming through here pretty slowly, too much throttle or brake input can cause a slide pretty quickly. Now, as you reach the apex and as you cross this curbing, I'm rolling on throttle just as I exit the curbing, but really no more than about 40-50% throttle until the car is straightened up. And so the point of getting the car straightened up is, as you kind of look through here, a good line where you can now get the car aimed to get a straight exit of the corner. Now in this case, my exit did put me into the dirt here just a bit, but that was okay to get on throttle here, because as the car straightened up, it's much more stable and you can cut into the grass here a bit without an off track. Now I typically try to avoid that and line the left side of the car up with the curbing a little bit better, but I did overshoot that just a bit here. But as long as the car is straightened up, really the most important thing to do is, as you're in first gear here, you want to make sure the car is straight, balanced, so that as you get on throttle, that you're not going to send the car into a spin. This is a point where I think it's maybe the most common point in the lap to spin on throttle off the corner, so be careful of that. So let's play that through here. All right, so coming down now into your second passing zone. So between the hairpin here and Cunningham all the way to the end here, this is your second passing zone. So if you can get a better exit off the hairpin than an opponent right ahead of you, obviously you can use the draft to get by them, or at least get side by side before getting into Cunningham. So this is your second good passing zone on the track. So again, that shows the importance of getting a good exit to this hairpin. So this is all full throttle all the way through here. The braking point, again, is threshold just before reaching the 3 cone. So there's going to be about a quick 80% braking at that point. And I guess starting to brake again, maybe just past the 4 cone. Quick threshold, easing off, a patient on turn in. Keep the car here to the left to again hit a late apex as you come around the corner here. Now the car can tend to slide here pretty easily, so I like to try to transition from my braking back to throttle pretty quickly or pretty smoothly without too much time off brake. Now there's a little bit of time here off brake as I'm turning in, but I was able to get to throttle real lightly here, right at about the apex. So that's the most important thing, that I think that if you overshoot the the apex, you brake too late, and you try to turn in with too much speed, that's really what gets you into trouble here. If you haven't carried too much speed in, then you'll be able to reach your apex here against a later apex, and you'll be able to start easing back on throttle. But you want to do that very gradually. So as you ease off brake and then back to throttle, keeping it really smooth through here is important, because it can be bumpy and it's slippery. So you see the car bounces around a fair amount there. So again, it's very flat. So definitely keep those inputs smooth through here. Don't overshoot. Late braking can get you into a lot of trouble here. And then of course easing back into throttle. And I'm real gradual and cautious about getting back to full throttle. There is a brief full throttle moment here off the corner, and then easing off to kind of making sure that the next couple of corners can be taken safely. Again, the car can come loose there. We'll talk about that here in a second. So let's go ahead and play this. All right, so as you're coming around Collier, the car can tend to come a little bit loose as you are still turning, kind of a long gradual turning radius here. And if you get to full throttle, if you try to carry full throttle right really in between this curbing and this next curbing here, I've had some instances where the car can go into a bit of an oversteer and spin. And so what I typically do as I reach full throttle, just for safety here, is between this curbing and the next, I just kind of lift a little bit and then ease back to full once I feel the car's stable. But that is a point where the car can come around on you without a whole lot of warning pretty quickly. So be wary of that. That is a trouble point that can definitely catch you off guard. So there's going to be just a light lift there. And then this is all full throttle all the way down into Tower. So Tower Corner is, for me, one of the more difficult corners on the track to hit consistently. What I've been doing to try to just develop consistency here, and also to approach this corner really the same every time, is to make sure that I'm in my braking zone, get the car straightened out, and pretty close to the curbing here. And in this case, I actually touched the curbing just lightly. And I'd like to say that I could do that more consistently and all the time, because it does help open the corner up a bit. And coming through this corner with all of the bumps, and with it being a little bit of a later apex, in that you don't want to get too close to this curbing until you've come around this corner right here. You really want to focus on reaching the curbing on the maybe just past or maybe just at the steeper part of the curbing here. You reach it too soon, and it'll either push you away, or you'll have to turn away from it, and you're going to be on an awkward line on exit, and it's going to send you either off into the dirt or lift. And so I focus on trying to late apex this a little bit, but it's real awkward because the car bounces around a bit, and it just doesn't feel real stable, like there's a lot of traction through here. So approaching the corner here, I'm going to be already moving to the left here and getting the car set up to the left for the braking zone, because I want a nice straight braking zone here. Starting to brake just about the 3-cone, and there's going to be about, I don't know, 65 to 70% threshold brake prior to reaching the 2-cone here. Keeping the car straightened up, patient on turning again. And it's a wide road, so that can kind of make it difficult to time your turn-in point. I guess if you look at it as maybe just past this line of tar in the asphalt, that could be your turn-in point. But really, you just want to make sure not to turn in too soon. Keep the speed up, very light trail braking into the corner, and aiming to get to throttle right at about that mid-corner point. The closer you can get to the curbing without touching it, the better you'll be able to carry speed off of it. And as I run off this corner here, I actually go off into the dirt just a bit. And because the car's straightened up, I'm actually at full throttle by the time I reach the dirt there. The car's straight, it's stable, it's fairly safe, although I try to avoid getting up into the dirt too much there, but you can do that without an off track, so that's interesting to see there. So let's play this through. All right, so coming down now through Bishop and all full throttle all the way through here. And by the way, this is your third passing zone. So coming off Tower, again, because it's a difficult corner, you can get some good passing opportunities here if an opponent makes a little bit of a mistake and you get a better exit, because you've got a pretty long, wide open throttle area from here all the way down into turn 15. So that's the third good opportunity. So coming down into turn 13, setting up to the left, getting ready to brake, really in between the 2 and the 3 cone. About a 70% threshold brake just before the 2 cone. Again, a bit patient on turn in. You want to make sure the apex right at about just before this darker patch of tar that you see here in the asphalt. So there's the apex there that I'm aiming for, intending to use all of the curbing. Now, while you can cross over the curbing briefly here, it typically leads you on a less than ideal line. So there's no off track for crossing over. I guess you could use that if you were completing a pass to the inside, but it's really not a faster line. You really just want to get all of the curbing here and get back to throttle just as you kind of cross the apex there, and sacrifice your speed on exit a little bit here to make sure that you can get close to the curbing, up onto the curbing, and then get kind of pointed toward this groove in the concrete and up over into the concrete before you start to turn back in. So before we go into Le Mans, we're going to go ahead and play this corner. All right, so Le Mans, your fourth passing zone. This is probably the best passing zone, typically because it is a corner that leads to one of the faster straights on the track, and it is a corner that's frequently mistakes are frequently made here, and a lot of speed because you're setting up for Le Mans by really the S's here through turn 15. If you mess up any point of 15, and this corner doesn't really have a number, but 16 is Le Mans up here. So you really want to make sure that you're hitting these corners well, because if you kind of mess up any of those corners, then you're going to end up losing a lot of speed and taking a less than ideal line, and your speed off of this corner is going to be a little slower, and so it leads to a great passing zone. So it is like I say, the longest straight on the track, and so you want to make sure that as you turn in here, that you're getting that turn in point just right. So what I do is I'm coming around the curbing here, and you can see that setting up for the corner, I'm using all of the curbing here in the steeper part of the curbing, and kind of coming off of it, and now getting the car pointed pretty close to the groove here in the concrete. That's where I'll also start to brake as I start to cross into that. So that's about a 30% brake, and then turning in very soon after, aiming for the apex here right at about the midpoint of the curbing, or the steeper part of the curbing. Now again, you can cross over the curbing without an off track, but depending on the angle that you do so, sometimes it's relatively smooth, and sometimes it can actually unsettle the car a lot. And when it does that, you take just a little bit too much, or you cross over just a bit too much, it can definitely delay your throttle point. So it's pretty risky, although you can put a tire clear over without the off track. It's pretty risky to do that. So I try not to. I try to just use all of the curbing and then start to get to throttle just as I am leaving the curbing there, and planning to get to full throttle by the time I reach the curbing to the left, and planning to use all of it up to the point where you can pretty lightly touch the dirt here without too much trouble, but any more than getting just maybe a couple inches into the dirt here, the car can spin real quickly on you. So plan to use all of the curving to the left, but avoid obviously dirt and grass, and plan to get back to the racing surface by the time the curving ends. You're going to be full throttle. You don't want to have to lift. If you find yourself carrying too much speed here and you're getting close to the grass and you have to lift, that's absolutely going to kill your straight line speed, and that's going to definitely hurt you down the straight there. So let's play this through. All right, so coming up on the aptly named Sunset Bend, and we do have a workings of a sunset here this time of day. So the it's interesting, if we ever do get 24-hour daylight transitions, and the time of day with the sun in your eyes could make this pretty challenging, making it difficult to see real well. So anyway, that's kind of interesting how that could affect the visibility into this corner. So anyway, turning in, I don't brake until I have crossed over the kind of the yellowish line here. So as I've kind of crossed in, I'm actually kind of trying to straighten out my braking zone once I've already turned in. So staying wide, turning in, and crossing over the line there a bit, and then braking very quickly, about 70% brake. You don't want to brake too hard here or too late here, because you're going to be turning just a bit still. And as you're turning, you're going to be kind of gradually easing off the brake to get the car rotated. And by the time you get to about this mid-corner point, the bumps and all of the unsettling that happens with the car, you really want to make sure your braking is done. And if anything, you're just really lightly tapping the brakes. And then there's a more significant bump right about here. And as the car crosses over this bump here, that's really kind of the cue to start rolling back on throttle. So I'll be starting to roll on throttle just after that, and aiming to use all of the road here on the exit of the corner all the way up to the grass, and really looking at this outcropping here and getting as close to the grass there as possible, because there again is a bit of a bump right through here where if you're turning away from the wall just a bit too much at your full throttle point, that can actually be enough to unsettle the car and send you into a spin right here. So make sure to use all of the road, all of the surface, all the way up to the grass to lessen the chance of a spin here. Actually touch the grass even lightly there, but by that point the car's pretty well straightened up. And again, the risk is really, I think, right as the car comes off of this bump. You can see it at speed, and as it kind of bounces over there, you're already at full throttle. If you're turning away from the wall, you're likely to put it into a spin. So just kind of aim to use all of the road there to make sure you're minimizing the chance of that. Let's play this through. All right, so there's a lap of Sebring International. Hope you found it helpful. We'll talk to you later.